No, let's get into it and see.
Sure. Beep number one.
Okay, so this was at 2:22 yesterday afternoon, and I have written, uh, I was aware of the weight of my body as I laid on the ground. It feels heavy, relaxed, soft. I'm reading, and the passage is fairly depressing, and I felt that emotion within me before the beep went off. The character is drinking away her depression alone on her couch, and I'm sort of embodying that emotion as I read it. In this sense, I would say the two clear elements of my inner experience were the physical weight of my body and the empathy I felt for the character I was reading about. The emotional, imaginative state was stronger of the two.
Okay. So the emotional imaginative state is stronger of the two. Um, could you describe this state somewhere? I know you described it somewhat already in terms
Yeah.
of the character drinking and this depression. Could
Hmm.
you is there more you could say about it before I try to ask specific questions?
Sure. Yeah. It was like just a feeling like and so me trying to like sum up like what did I like embodying that emotion and stuff. That's what I was trying to explain of like rather than it wasn't that I could picture that scenario of that character or whatever. It was more just like I had the feeling that was being described in the book. Like I felt that sense. Um, and that sense was, yeah, like, yeah, sort of depressive and sort of like almost like a loneliness and like whatever. But none of that was related to my actual life. Like that was definitely the result of reading about this passage. But that's sort of what I'm trying to explain of like felt like this deep empathy or embodiment of the character's emotion. That's how I was experiencing what I was consuming rather than visualizing the scene or anything like that.
Okay. So you're not imagining the character or there's no, or is there in some ways something to do with this character, or is it really more about the feeling at this moment?
Uh, how do you mean?
Like even if you're not visually picturing the scenario with the character, is there in some way something about the this character's situation in this experience, or no?
Yeah, I think, well, I just think me reading about the character's situation was sort of like I was soaking in that um, scene in a feelings way, I guess. This feels a bit wish-washy, but um, yeah, I don't know. Oh, sorry.
Did this feeling have a location?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think so. No, that's yeah, like how I want to say it was just like a state of being is sort of probably an apt description.
Okay, just to stay, but no particular location to pin down.
No,
And
So can I broaden that a little bit? So any bodily aspect of this, or is this would you say
I don't think so.
mental state rather than a bodily state?
I mean, like, I feel like it's kind of interesting that I'm as I mentioned with the other half of it, like I was laying on the ground and I remember sort of being aware of like the weight of my body and like perhaps that is sort of all part of it because that's sort of similar to the range of emotions that I was probably feeling. But no, like there was no tightness in any area or anything like that. No.
Okay.
I want to ask a bit more about the character depression,
Hmm.
loneliness kind of thing before we get into the body heaviness.
Yeah.
Um, so it's it's so I'm kind of get at like it's a loneliness and kind of depressiveness, or like, or how would you convey that to me?
Yeah, I think that's challenging because it feels sort of a little bit hard to label it that accurately because all like even when I was writing this description, like the way to describe it best felt just like empathy. And so it was just that feeling, which feels like varied, like it. So trying to like categorize it like that feels like a little bit too specific beyond that. Like the picture that was being painted about this character was certainly like the descriptions were, you know, very like depressing and lonely and all that sort of tone. And so I feel like I was oozing this empathy for this character that was within that tone. I'm not sure that answered anything.
Well, somewhat. But just that it can't be like pinned down in one specific word. I think that gets at it. And you mentioned like the character drinking away their life, or
Drinking away their depression is what I wrote, I think.
Drinking away is something about drinking or something about the situation present in this feeling, or is that more just context?
No, I think both. Yeah. I think that the context that I'm given in this description, I think, is my best attempt to explain that feeling of empathy that I had. Like, so I think that context is really relevant that's the best way I can sort of explain the energy that then I was radiating or something. So yeah, I don't know. This is challenging for me because it was a clear state of being, feeling, whatever. But to try and get more specific than that, it feels a bit hard to grab at.
Okay.
So I thought the questions were too broad, which is probably why Mel is having difficulty. So if you ask the question, is there something about, well, then the answer to that is yes. There is something about the war in Vietnam, and there is something about Christ on the cross, and there is something about Cadillac Escalades that are present, that somehow figure in Mel's situation. So if you ask, is there something about, the answer has got to be yes.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what Mel is trying to say, I don't think. What Mel is trying to say, I think, was, and you could ask something like, at the moment of this beep, is the content, the drinking, the rest of the scene, whatever that scene is about, somehow present to you directly, or is what's present directly to you the feeling, which is no doubt the result of having read about that. But my experience at this moment is aimed at me rather than out there at the guy.
Mm. That's an interesting question too, because if I was going to answer that, I'm not sure of the two options.
Okay.
I think it's some sort of mix of both.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have a question. I think this question that I asked will probably, it might have to lead to hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering, the feeling being empathy for a character, and that being, if that is different, and then how, then if you just had that feeling yourself.
In terms of like whether I was directly experiencing a lonely, depressing scenario.
Yes, in terms of, yeah, but that might be hard to answer without a hypothetical.
It definitely is a little bit hypothetical, but it's an interesting one. It's hypothetical, but I'm going to answer it for the sake of fun. Like, I think it is slightly different, but marginally so, because like, yeah, it was interesting when the big
also doesn't. I don't know if I phrase it in terms of different, but I don't necessarily need to assume that it is different, but just.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it's quite interesting because you're getting into how I experience empathy, or like the the level of my empathy. But yeah, I think it's definitely a strength to it, or whatever, that feels like I sort of have to remind myself that I'm not personally going through a depressive, lonely episode. And that was sort of experienced when the beep went off, that like, oh, I had this state of being, this air of, or this tone of all of those elements, loneliness, depressive, whatever. But like, I was laying in the sunshine in my family home in Australia and had none of those feelings beyond that was the state of being I was in after reading that passage. If that's sort of...
You mean after the beep goes up, having to remind yourself that you're not actually in the situation? Because at the moment right before the beep, it sounds like it is just this situation without you reminding yourself that it's not real.
Yeah. Yeah. Like when, before the beep goes off, I'm just in that state. 100%. Yeah.
Russ, do you have questions about this state? Before we turn on.
Well, I'm not sure I understood the last exchange. Are you saying that at the moment of the beep, you didn't know that you were reading a book and that this was coming from, this feeling was coming from?
No. Okay. No, just more like as in
then I'm happy.
At the moment of the beep, you have, this feeling or emotional sensation that, has aspects of loneliness and depression or like, whatever. And I experienced that in I experienced that to a level that is a little overwhelming, in the sense that then, when you go to write it down or you take yourself out of that moment after the beep or whatever, you like have to almost remind yourself that actually your life's fine and you're not depressed and lonely, if that sort of makes sense.
Actually, I have some more questions actually that are occurring to me. By depression, I could think a lot of things. There could be lots of things I'm not even thinking about. Could be more of a sadness, or could be more of just an emptiness or a hopelessness, or feeling of like lack of self-worth, or just like, I think depression can mean maybe a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to you, or maybe even depression is not the word, or maybe it is more about the loneliness or more about some other mix. But I'm just curious about your experience specifically. Yeah.
My experience specifically would be, again, like I go back to what I said before, where I would find it hard to be more specific, because it just feels like a state that encompasses a little bit of all of those things that you said. Like every word that you used, I would say, there was an element of that. There was an element of that. So it's more of like this fuzzy Venn diagram or something, as opposed to being able to label it too acutely like that, I think. And perhaps that's because like this is just my feelings from reading a passage in a book. Like I'm not actually genuinely feeling all those elements beyond the book making me feel that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a bit skeptical if it was like each of the actual words I said, but I do see that it is this kind of inchoate or thing that's hard to categorize into the words we have. So I think I'm at my limits of getting more specifics on it. So I'm curious for Russ to take it away. But I actually could ask about the intensity, I guess, because it seems like you mentioned a few times it was quite strong. Was it strong at this moment? Or
also, thank you. Intensity is the word I've been looking for this whole time, saying levels and things. Intensity. I would say the intensity was just to a point where it was the key aspect of my awareness at that time, or my experience at that time, was absolutely majority this emotional state. And so that is true. Was it an intensity of like these depressive like feelings that made me feel really personally depressed and horrible? No, but it was like that emotional state was clearly my number one experience. So like intensity, it's like still somewhat subdued, if that's not too much of an oxymoron, but it's the clear main part of my experience. I don't think that's that clear.
No, that made sense. Do you have other questions, Russ?
No, I'm happy with that portion.
Okay. So for the bodily sensation, this heavy relaxedness, could you describe that a bit more?
Yeah, I was laying on the ground outside, and yeah, my body felt heavy. I didn't necessarily notice the, like the temperature or the breeze or anything like that. I just remember feeling like, I guess what I would describe as a state of relaxation, sort of, that my body felt heavy to the ground, not in a unpleasant or tired way, just in a relaxed way.
Mm-hmm. Is it any specific part of your body?
I don't think so. I'd say like the whole thing. Sorry, can I pause and put this? There's a really bright sun coming through right behind me.
Sure, yeah.
There you go.
I've been trying to figure out what that was.
Sorry, yeah.
It looked like a UFO was sitting on your shoulder there. And
I'll see sun coming up. It's not any specific part. Is it kind of more where your body meets the ground, or more just throughout the body, or on top?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Probably where my body meets the ground, but getting a bit close to the limits of my memory.
Okay. So this heavy, relaxed, is it just physical, or is part of it, is there kind of a mental relaxation part to it, or no?
No, I don't think so, because the emotional mental part of it was definitely consumed by the depressive, lonely, empathetic state that I was taking on to do with that character. So no.
And I think maybe it was my system. Something is happening which I can't figure out exactly what it is, that it's switching me from my podcasting microphone to my
computer.
Yeah, it said the error was on your end. So.
Julian just absolutely pointing fingers. Yeah, specifically.
Well, I had a Zoom meeting earlier, and I had a similar issue, and I don't know what the deal is. So it wouldn't surprise me if it kicked me out, and then I got back, and we didn't really check to see whether the system was still alive. Probably still was.
Okay.
I did have one more question about what we were talking about there, though, and that was when you originally or two more questions actually. When you originally described this bodily experience, used words that were sort of a long way away from heavy, but I can't remember what they were. Soft, maybe? And
you're actually right, because there's such an oxymoron. The words I used were heavy, relaxed, and soft. Okay.
And so can you tell me more about what the soft access?
Yeah, I think the heavy was to do with like felt weighted to the ground. And then relaxed and soft are probably trying to describe the same thing of, there was no, like my body didn't feel tense. So soft, I sort of mean in that sense of like kind of malleable and placid, I guess. I guess ultimately I'm trying to describe the physical sensation of a relaxed body. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so we're on number 2 for
Yep.
now.
Well, I was asking when I crept out there, the is it reasonable to ask about which emphasis was on, how much of the emphasis was on the
Yep.
feelings and how much was on the body?
It definitely was majority the feelings. I would say some sort of like 70-30 scenario, percentage-wise.
Okay. So substantially more about the feelings than the body. Got it.
Cool.
Number 2.
This went off at 2:30 p.m. and I have written a real state of nothingness, not aware of anything to do with my physical body, no thoughts, no particular feelings. I was laying on the ground and that's about it. My eyes were open, looking up at the ceiling, but I wasn't taking anything in. That doesn't make sense, but I've written I wasn't taking anything in my sight. I could also use the word tranquil to describe this sort of state of nothingness.
So you're inside looking up, laying down looking up. And nothing, your eyeballs are aimed at the ceiling, but you're not really seeing it? Is that the...
Yeah, like that's where they're looking, but it's not really doing much beyond that.
Okay. And I'm gathering that there's nothing to be said, so I'm happy to say there's nothing in this beat.
Yeah.
Julian?
I'm happy with that as well, pretty much. I'm wondering, you did mention kind of tranquility, but is that just as in the absence of something rather than a feeling that's present?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment. Yeah. The absence of something as opposed to an overwhelming sense of tranquility. Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm good for this one too.
Okay. So the next one was 3:20 p.m. and I've written...
Hang on just a minute before we get down there. So it looks to me like in my audio tracings that my audio is softer than everybody else's audio. Is there a way do I have a control over that?
It doesn't look softer on mine.
Doesn't look to me.
It didn't sound...
It looked...
Yeah.
So it sounds all right to you, right?
I also normalize them afterwards, so I try to bring the levels to around the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next one is 3:20 p.m. and I've written, I was rummaging in a packet of Easter eggs and I felt them in my hands, but the noise the plastic packet made was the main part of my awareness. It was loud in an otherwise quiet room. It was sort of a crunchy sound. Beyond that, I'd describe this as fairly nothing. Hearing the result of the action I was doing, but I wasn't really thinking about anything or looking at anything either. I was sort of staring blankly as I sifted through the Easter eggs with my left hand.
Okay, so you're opening these Easter eggs and it's fairly nothing except for this noise. And you are... The noise isn't just something that's occurring. It's actually in your direct experience of this moment, or is it kind of just something that's...
No, I think it was in my direct experience because the room was quiet and it sort of was an interesting noise, so it stood out. So it was definitely part of my awareness. It wasn't like a secondary thing. So yeah, I was inside and sort of like looking sort of, off to my right or whatever. My left hand was up in the cupboard rummaging through this plastic packet of chocolate Easter eggs.
So through a plastic packet, and it's this crunchy sound. Are you noticing anything specific about this crunchiness, this sound?
I don't know.
So, is it that you're really focused on this sound and it's really grabbing your attention, or is this beep, or is it your experience fairly absent and maybe there's a little bit of some sound in there? Or which one?
That's actually probably a good description. That this is like fairly nothingness, but that sound is registering, and that's about it.
So the sound is registering. Crunchy plastic, like a and you mentioned something about looking at some point, but it doesn't seem, or is the looking directly experienced, you think, or you're not sure?
I don't think it is. So that's sort of, I was just trying to say that like it's not sort of experienced in that I was looking in a completely different direction and sort of at nothing in particular, and it wasn't really part of my awareness. Is the only reason I sort of mentioned that.
The crunchy, plasticky, wrappy Easter egg thing is there, but it is in your experience, but it's not like it's grabbing your attention in a very strong way. So that's what I have for this moment. Russ, any other questions?
So the first salvo, when you described this, I took the sound to be fairly central in your experience, because you said something like, I hear the crunchy sound and described the crunchy sound, and then you said something like, and beyond that it was sort of nothing. But then as the result of the discussion, we have sort of elevated the nothingness and made that more important than it seemed like it was at the beginning. And so I'm wondering what happened here.
I'm not sure is probably the best answer. Because I think that maybe both are true. Like, maybe it's like a 50-50 sort of thing of like, I'm experiencing this sort of state of nothingness apart from this crunchy sound. Like, I'm doing an action, but that's not even really registering in my awareness, but the sound certainly is registering. How much, at what intensity compared to like the general state of nothingness, like, you know, maybe it's sort of a 50-50. Yeah.
So the line of questioning, I thought, elevated the nothingness and demoted the sensory awareness aspect. And I was worried about that, because I think people very often will say about the sensory aspect, well, you know, it's nothing. I was paying attention. But it was sort of nothing when it was actually sort of present. So I think the sort of the downhill way about sensory awareness is that people generally diminish that.
That's a good point, yeah.
And I thought Julian's question maybe contributed to that.
And that's interesting to note for myself, because I think I do the same thing from a description point of view, of like just naturally downplay sensory awareness, and that's something I'm actually trying to get better at as well. So that's interesting to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was aware of that, but didn't address it well enough. I kind of wanted to find out, like, if the sensory aspect was, like, how much it was grabbing your experience at that moment. But yeah, I wasn't aware that, you know, that you could downplay it, like, or not even take it seriously in a way, like, oh yeah, just the crunchy sound, it doesn't matter. But yeah, if the crunchy sound was really there, then
yeah, I think that's like more on me than you, to be honest. I think that's still a part where I need to just get better at trying to accurately know.
It's definitely on me too, then.
What I would say is that if somebody, at which I think Mel did, described in fair detail the sensory aspect.
Yeah.
I think she said it was crunchy and worked at describing what that experience was like. Then I think it's fair to say, well, the chances are good that was in her experience. She's trying to tell us about something.
I mean, I'm not denying that it was in your
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
That wasn't.
It's a matter of degree. I'm guessing it's stronger in her experience than maybe Julian gave her credit for.
Cool. Next one.
Number one.
3:42 p.m. I've written, I'm listening as my sister said, there are still tickets available on the website. That's a direct quote. And I'm looking at her, attentively taking in her words. We're sitting outside and I can feel the warmth of the sun on my legs. It feels a little tingly on my skin in an enjoyable way.
And does that mean that at the moment of this beep, you're both feeling warm, tingly, and
Correct.
understanding what your sister's saying?
They were the two aspects of my experience.
And is one of them stronger than the other? Or maybe that question doesn't make sense. So they could be 100% of both.
Yeah. I don't know. If I think about that question too hard, I'd probably go insane. Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with the warmth, tingly. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I was laying half in the shade, half in the sun. So my legs are in the sun, and they'd been there for a while. So it was a lovely summer day in Australia. So I could feel, the warmth on my legs, and it just made me aware of my legs, I guess. This sun is really sorry. So yeah, like that awareness in your legs specifically because the sun is heating them up. So I'm aware of my legs as opposed to I'm not really feeling my arms per se. And yeah, that sensation feels sort of like tingly and nice and warm and tingly in like a skin deep level too, not like a muscular level,
Okay, then I'm happy with that portion.
Wait, I might have just missed this, but was it any specific part of the legs or just overall?
It was like the whole portion of my legs that was in the sun, which was majority of my leg. I would say up to just above my knee.
Wait, so from feet to above the knee?
Sorry. I've done that in a weird way, but yes, from just above the knee down.
Okay. Then I'm good on that.
And then your sister is telling you that there's still tickets available. And is there more to say about that experience?
Not other than that I'm engaged in conversation and I'm at the moment before the beep went off, she's the one speaking and I am listening attentively and not distracted thinking about any other element of okay, well, should we buy tickets or whatever. I'm just looking at her and listening to the exact words that she said, which were, there are still tickets on the website, and I'm sort of blinkers on, just focused on hearing that and taking in that information. And I would just say not distracted, I'm just doing the act of listening, so I'm just inputting that phrase.
And so would you say that that I'm aware of the focusedness of this, or is it just I'm listening to her, I'm listening to her with comprehension and there's nothing else going on?
The first bit, I think, whatever you said, of no, there's no meta thing. I'm just absorbed in listening, but I'm not aware of myself listening at the time. I'm just after the fact describing it that way.
Okay. And we've had samples of, if I'm recalling correctly, of where there has been sort of like a, even without a meta awareness, a particular absorption. And is this like that, or is this like I'm hearing her, she's telling me about the tickets, I'm processing that, I'm hearing with understanding.
I'm not sure I understand the distinction again, though. Sorry, go again.
My recollection of some previous samples is that you have had some samples where people have been speaking and you seem to be describing that you were tunneled in on that, sort of actively excluding everything else or something. I don't know exactly. And I want to know whether this is like that or whether this is, she's talking, I'm hearing, I'm not hearing anything else. So I've in that respect tunneled in, but I'm not,
like hyper-focused or something. No, I would say that the first description is true. Like, beyond the fact, aside from the fact that I can feel that tingly sensation on my legs, but otherwise I would describe this as like a hyper-focused. I think that's so often the case when I'm engaged in conversation. Sorry, I'm going to move this again. We're really battling some Australian sun here.
Looks good. Okay, I think I'm good.
I have maybe a question or two. Yep. So she's saying there's still tickets on the website, and you focused on her talking. Is your focus more about the meaning of there being tickets on the website, and those are the exact words, but it's more about the meaning of what she's saying, or is it on her speech and on maybe on the vocal qualities of there are still tickets on the website, or maybe on the words themselves, or maybe on something else? But could you say like where, like what you're zoning in on at this moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say anything like vocal qualities or anything like that. I would say on like the meaning associated with the words. However, I wouldn't go too far with that in terms of, I almost think it's a little bit more just like hearing the words, processing the words, like obviously processing some degree of meaning, but it's like, with this hyper focus, like input it, like listening and taking in the words, I'm not then like attaching meaning to the words and then thinking 3 steps ahead of like, oh, well, that means we should go, like whatever. I'm just, there are tickets on the website. So I am hearing and taking in that means there are tickets on the website, and that's about it. I'm not focused on any aspects of her vocal qualities or how she looks or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. Then I'm good on the sample too.
Number 5.
This went off at 3:58 p.m. I've written, I'm laying down outside and I felt my face pressed into the pillow. I felt heavy, a little uncomfortable and contorted. This was a skin deep feeling, not a deep muscular one. I had just put my book down and I didn't really have any thoughts per se. I can't even recall if my eyes were open or closed. No visual aspects were particularly relevant to my experience. I felt that tranquility that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. So your face is pressed into the pillow. It's a little uncomfortable, contorted, more of a skinny thing, face and pillow thing than deep and muscular. And then there's the tranquility. Is the tranquility part separate from the space pillowy thing, or part of it? Or do you just mean tranquility as in there's not much else going on in your experience?
I think so. I would say the tranquility here is the same thing. It is similar to me describing a state of nothingness,
Okay. So it's not like there's a separate tranquil feeling. It's more just like the pillow face thing is the main thing and not so much else.
Yeah, actually, and your question hasn't changed my mind here. I'm pulling myself up. I think actually there was an aspect of like tranquility and relaxation experienced here, not just a nothingness. Like there was definitely an element of that state of being present that is separate to that contorted, weird feeling I had on my face.
Okay. It seems like is the contorted feeling the main thing in your experience right at this moment though?
Like, yeah, but it's a bit, I have hesitation with that just because it's much easier to grab at. So like that's an easy thing for me to describe and say like, oh, my face felt a bit weird and I felt a bit heavy and a bit contorted, because that's so much easier for me to describe as opposed to like just this overall state of like nothingness, tranquility, like whatever. So I think it's standing out more, but like whether that was experienced in a greater intensity than this overall state of being that I'm explaining, like I have hesitation about that.
Okay. Because the tranquility, I mean, yeah, I'm still wondering about it because at first it sounded like you were saying, well, first you described the tranquility, and then that maybe it was similar to the other beep, whereby, I don't know, tranquil or relaxed or whatever you said, it was more just the absence of anything. Then you said that no, it actually is a state. I'm curious, was there something that made you, I don't know if it's changed your mind or just realize something different or compare it to the previous sample in a different way?
I think that I was like experiencing relaxation at this point, like in terms of I just put my book down and I was sort of, I just remember like being aware almost at the time that I was relaxed and sort of in a nice state, which is slightly different to other times when I can just be nothing. But then oftentimes I'll describe nothing when the underlying feeling is perhaps that as well. So I don't know, Julian is the answer. I don't know.
Russ, do you have more questions on this part before?
No, I'm good about that, I think.
Okay. Then the face pillow thing. Your face is on a pillow. Could you describe that again?
So I was laying down outside and I felt my face pressed into the pillow. It felt heavy and a little uncomfortable and contorted. I've written this was a skin deep feeling, not a muscular one. So I was sort of, again, laying outside. I had a pillow under here and like there was a lot of weight in my face and I was sort of like in a weird, uncomfortable position. So my face was kind of pushed up like this. That was definitely part of my awareness. Like I was aware of the physicality of that, of like my face felt sort of squished and as I said, it was all like sort of a skin deepy sort of feeling. Like I didn't feel like contorted in my muscles, but like there was an uncomfortable aspect of that.
Was it a specific part of your face?
Sorry?
Was it a specific
like
part of your
my
face?
cheek predominantly. Cheekbone. Maybe a little bit of jaw.
Cheekbone. Okay. So the bonier parts.
Yeah.
Cheekbone,
all of this
jaw.
bit.
The parts that are touching the pillow
Yes.
at this moment? Okay. A little bit uncomfortable. Is discomfort, so discomfort here is slight? It's not like, could you describe the intensity?
Yeah, not very intense at all. gosh, like, yeah, if there's an uncomfortable aspect to it, it's really like sort of, I don't know, 10% or percent is a weird calculator, but like it's not a strong feeling. I'm not like in pain or anything. It's just like slightly uncomfortable.
Okay, then I'm good on that part.
Me too.
Okay.
Number 6. And I've got to ask: is the picture, the
Yes.
window? Is that where you've been
was right
outside
here.
there? And looks like a
It was very pleasant.
totally pleasant place to be.
All right, this is the last one, I believe. Yeah, okay, so I've got 4:42 p.m. I was looking at my phone and typing an email. The words are flowing out of me without much forethought. I describe this as autopilot, as I have in previous beeps. I'm laying on my side outside again. There's a chill in the air and I notice the cool breeze on my bare legs, but the majority of my awareness is typing out this email on my phone with my thumbs.
So about the email, let's talk about that. About the email. I understand I'm doing it with my thumb. Am I experiencing my thumb, or is that just part of the autopilot?
I don't know confidently enough to actually say there.
Okay. And so does that mean that I don't know basically anything about my email typing? You said that the words were coming out.
Yeah, like the words are coming out. I'm typing on my phone like this. I just sort of mean like, you know, it's autopilot-y in the sense that it's sort of happening in terms of I'm not sitting there stewing over the exact words that are going to happen, and it's my thumbs are moving.
And is the content present to you? You know what you're typing?
Present in the sense that like that I'm writing the words, but like what I was trying to describe is there's not like a whole lot of forethought. So the content is part of my awareness or experience, but like as sort of as a live thing, like the words are just coming out and I'm seeing them and I'm typing them, but I'm not crafting them before they're sort of coming out of my thumbs, if that makes sense.
So it does make sense, but I'm trying to figure out how much content is there. So I think it's possible to say, you know, I'm writing an email and I'm saying I'll meet you tomorrow at 4:00 or whatever, and I've already decided what I'm going to say, and now that's just coming out of my thumbs, and there's nothing in my experience that my thumbs are accomplishing this task that I have set for myself. Or I am typing and I'm not crafting anything. I don't have to worry about whatever it is to say. But while I'm doing that, I'm sort of aware of this target that I've got. I'm setting this appointment for, and that's somehow present to me. So the question is this entirely autopilot? Like nothing about this aspect of my experience is actually in my experience, even the fact that I got this appointment tomorrow, or whatever the content is, or is that content somehow present? Or maybe that's not a possible question.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit, but I think of those options like the content is present, because I think some maybe relevant context is the email that I was typing was not a simple thing like that. It wasn't as straightforward as like, oh, send an email about this thing. Like I hadn't prior to my thumbs moving, I hadn't decided what this email was gonna say. So the content was part of my awareness in some sense, but it sort of like was live unfolding. Like I can't, like it has to have been part of my, like I know that's what my attention was focused on writing this email and these words coming out, but yeah, it didn't, they weren't there until they were on the page, sort of thing. But I don't know.
So the part about the content has to be there because I make an email. I don't think that's actually true. I think it's possible for your bag of bones and neurons to be processing stuff and having it come out of your fingers, thumbs, without any before the footlights awareness at all. I think that's possible. In the same sense as driving, I can have a conversation. The driving is skillfully happening, but not in my experience. Or it's possible that I have, in my experience, some sense of what I'm typing. But maybe that's not a question that's possible to answer, or maybe it's an ambiguous
I
question.
unfortunately think it's some sort of mix between the two. Like I want to gravitate towards the driving example, but I don't think it's quite that simple. I think that there was something else as well. But yeah.
Okay. And then the other half of the experience, or the portion of the experience, is I'm feeling a chill on my legs.
Yep.
And is there anything more to say about that?
Not really, just in the sense that like that was also like that was a very secondary part of my experience at the time. Like majority of my experience was my thumbs in this email and whatever, but there was also an aspect of me just being aware of my physical body due to the chill of the breeze on my legs, and that felt like I guess sort of similar to the like feeling of the sun on my legs in terms of like it was a skin feeling. So there's just like wouldn't describe it as tingly and warm and not all of that, quite the opposite, but it was skin deep, that experience. But it just, there was an awareness, even if it's at 10, 20%, there was an awareness of my legs at this moment, or like my physical body due to the wind.
Okay. And then I haven't figured out the 10% or whatever. It seemed like we were talking about the thumbs as being sort of autopilot, close to being 0%. So
Yeah, I don't think percentages are actually helpful here because it's one of those scenarios where I'm like, I don't know, like the difference between me describing it as like, whoa, 90% of my experience was like typing this email, but like in a way that's like, that's the focus part of my attention, but in like an autopilot way. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Of like, so it's not like it's a very hard thing to try and describe because it is the clear key aspect of my experience at the time, but not an intensity in the same way that I'm listening to my sister, I guess, or whatever. So I find these experiences really hard to describe because they're that autopilot-y, nothingness-y thing.
So is what we're saying here that the autopilot nothingness portion, which is sort of aptly described as autopilot-y nothing, is still substantially more present to me than the chill on my legs? Both are present, but
I think
the autopilot is more present?
I think so. Like, for instance, I don't think in weeks gone by or months gone by that I would have even noted the chill on my legs. Like, that is an aspect of me expanding my attention, or like trying to get better at encompassing all aspects of my awareness. Whereas previously I would have just described this as autopilot nothingness, but I'm trying to like be aware of all aspects of my experience, including sensory ones or whatever.
And is the chill on your legs present in your experience before the beep and 1 microsecond before the beep goes on? So not just the result of a cataloging, but then I think I'm good.
So sometimes previously we did percentages, but that they didn't add up to 100. They'd be like, one thing is 5% and another thing is 1%, but like those don't add up to 100. Would that make sense here?
Yes, except I think that the challenge I'm finding with the percentages is like, so I find it very easy to denote a percentage to a sensory experience, like a breeze on my legs. Where I'm finding percentage challenging is when it's levels of nothingness and autopilotness. I think that's where I'm getting confused. Like I'm confusing myself. So I could say like, I could give a percentage for the experience of the breeze on my legs, and it would be like minor, would be like a 10% sort of thing. That I'm okay with, but then trying to label the autopilot-y, nothingnessy, this email's happening without much thought sort of thing, trying to put a percentage on that, I'm like, what does that even mean? Because the whole thing is so like, that whole experience is so weird anyway. So it's so not tangible that to try and put a percentage on it feels really weird.
Yeah. I also had trouble with this one because it seemed, in terms of degrees of nothingness, I was leaning towards understanding it as, well, not quite nothingness. I mean, there's no clear content of what exactly you're typing in the email, but there is some kind of not hyper-focused attention, but it's there. It's still before the footlights in some way. It seemed like maybe, Russ, you didn't understand it as that, or so.
So if I understood what you were saying, I think I agree with you about that. I think it's what we're finding is that that it is both fair to say about this particular beep that there was nothing in autopilot, but it also is somehow occupying Mel before the footlights of consciousness. Both of those things are true.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the way it is.
Yeah. I think that's definitely feels accurate to me. It's just a somewhat unsatisfactory thing for me, but it's true. So I need to just deal with that.
And I think it's the unsatisfactoriness, I think, comes from some presupposition about the way the thought process has to work. And apparently that isn't the way it has to work. It's somehow else. I can be more or less totally involved and still have it be more or less nothing. And that seems like an oxymoron, but apparently we have to figure out why that's not an oxymoron, because that's the way it is.
Completely agree with that. That feels really accurate to my experience.
So should we do this again?
I was saying to Julian that I could be back in New York this time next week. It's a long story, but I will find out today or tomorrow about a job which would then have me booking a flight ASAP or not. So do you want to like pencil in this same sort of Australian time zone for next week, and then I will let you know if that changes and I'm in New York?